Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to AlphaBiolabs' latest webinar. Drug trends are changing. Are you testing accordingly? It's great to have so many of you join us this lunchtime. So my name's Andrew Priestley. I'm the Legal Marketing Manager at AlphaBiolabs, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ashley Friday, who's our Sample Collections Manager. So we've got 45 minutes, it's a lot to get through, jam-packed agenda. So we'll keep within the 45 minutes. I'm going to open up this session. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of change in drug trends. So we've got on the agenda there the rise of synthetic substances, prescription medication misuse, and poly-drug use. We'll also have an insight into the major drug groups. We've got a new guide we've just brought out, which I'll talk to you about as well. And I'll also give you an overview of the drug testing panels that we offer at AlphaBiolabs. I'm then going to hand over to Ashley. Ashley's going to show you how to choose the right test for your case. So she'll give you an overview of all the different sample types that we offer for drug testing. And also it'd be an opportunity just to really give you a refresh of how the sample collection process works as well. We'll then obviously finish with our live Q&A. Thanks to those of you that have asked a question during the registration process. We will answer those questions, and time permitting, we will answer any other questions that you ask during the live webinar. So please use the Q&A facility on the Zoom functionality which we're using today to put through any question that you might have to us. We'll do our best to answer in the session. If not, don't worry, we'll email you an answer later on today. So please ask as many questions on drug testing as you would like to do so. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the rise of synthetic substances, prescription medication misuse, and poly-drug use. So I'll just go through the bullet points on there in a moment. This is so for those of you that attended the webinars back in the autumn, we looked at a survey. It's an annual survey from the Office of National Statistics. It's called Drug Misuse in England and Wales. When we looked at it in November, the latest survey was the year ended March 2024. So obviously the metrics we presented then were in relation to that. Since then, they've released their latest survey. So these numbers here are for their latest survey for the year ending March 2025. So it's going back over the past 12 months from March 2025. And really, we found this a good study to review because it does tend to represent households which are typical of the families that you represent. It does exclude things such as criminal usage, homeless usage, people currently in treatment. The survey tends to be about 35,000 households across England and Wales, where they select one individual per household. It's not mandatory to respond, but they do tend to get a good response. And what they do with those responses is they then produce estimates, which are statistically representative of the population. When we talk about drug misuse here, we're defining that as someone who admits misusing drugs at least once in the previous 12 months. And also, when we talk about polydrug combinations, what we mean is that a polydrug combination is where more than one drug is used by someone at the same time to enhance the effects of both drugs, or where they certainly use them in close proximity to each other, almost like to complement each other. So again, we'll cover some of those examples as well. So if you look at the bullet points, so really what the survey was saying, the latest survey, was that, as you would expect, illicit drug use remains widespread and a persistent issue. Across the sort of overall comparing year on year, it was felt that the level was pretty much the same. However, the makeup was continuing to change a bit in terms of what actual drugs are being misused. You can see there that 9% of adults in the age 16 to 59, which equates to about 2.9 million people in England and Wales, It's estimated that they do misuse drugs at least once in a 12-month period. And 15% of young adults in the 16 to 24 age category, it's estimated, have used illicitly used drugs at least once in that 12-month period. Also, interestingly, from this survey was there seemed to be a marked increase of illicit use among older age groups, in particular the age 45 to 54 category. Now, at that age, obviously, still absolutely have children, could have young children. They could even be grandparents at that age as well. So, in terms of child welfare, it's worth considering that sort of aspect as well. But there was a marked increase of illicit use seen among the age 45 to 54-year-olds. As you would probably expect, cannabis remains the most commonly misused drug. And we'll come on to that in a moment in terms of actual numbers. And then cocaine, ecstasy or MDMA, and ketamine remain prevalent as well. Also, a key message we talked about in the autumn webinars, and we're going to emphasize that again today, is the increased misuse of prescription drugs and polydrug combinations. So I defined what a polydrug is just a moment ago. And again, I'll give you some examples of that as well. So really another key message is that when you're considering selecting drug testing for any particular case you're working on, you need to think beyond the standard drug panels that ourselves and other testing providers will offer. Standard drug panel alone may no longer reflect the real world risk. So again, it's looking a bit beyond the standard drug panel. Okay, so this chart coming from the report, and what I thought I'd do, because there's loads of data in there, I thought I'd just break it down in terms of the top 10 drugs that they identified and just talk a little bit about each of those. So this is, again, these are estimated figures by the ONS of the number of adults, and all the numbers there are in thousands, 16 to 59, who have misused drugs at least once in the previous 12 months. So these are the last 5 surveys. So the light blue bars is the latest survey up to the end of March 2025. And then it goes all the way back to the dark blue bar, which is actually March 2019. There was a 2-year break for this survey because of COVID. So I think, 2021 and 2022, they didn't actually do a survey, but it does give you a good sort of idea of what's happened the last few years, and you can see it's fairly static. But for example, with cannabis, in the most recent report, they estimate that about 2.15 million adults in this age category have used cannabis in the previous 12 months. Cocaine and then MDMA or ecstasy, both illegal and from the stimulants drug group, are ranked second and third, with 693,000 and 392,000 people respectively having misused those drugs. Then the survey, interesting this one, they put hallucinogens in there, and hallucinogens really is a drug group in itself. So there's a number of different types of hallucinogens, which we'll talk about. And you can see that looking at the numbers there, so in the latest survey, 362,000 misusing hallucinogens, it's very similar to the level of ecstasy misuse. However, what's interesting is you will often find ecstasy as a methamphetamine in a standard drug panel, but you very rarely see hallucinogens offered. We're the same. We don't offer it in our standard drug panel, but we do now offer it in our extended drug panel. And the level of usage is very similar to ecstasy. So it's those sort of drugs that you need to be considering more than perhaps you have done previously. And that would include things like LSD, magic mushrooms. Hallucinogens are never prescribed. They're always illegal controlled drugs. So as I say, you won't really see them in a standard drug panel, but you can, certainly from ourselves, obtain a test for them from the extended drug panel. Then I've put ketamine, or the surveys put ketamine. Ketamine, in effect, is a sort of hallucinogen, and we do include it in our hallucinogen panel. However, they've classified it separately here because it's technically classified as a dissociative anesthetic. You've probably heard quite a bit about ketamine recently. Panorama even had a program about it at the end of last year, but it does continue to be a really widespread concern and issue. And unfortunately, the misuse of it does extend to young adults and even school children. It's very easily obtainable. The highs are very high and it can be very dangerous as well. So, ketamine is certainly something that needs to be considered when deciding what drugs to test for. And then the sixth drug there, we've got amphetamines, which again, you'll tend to will find amphetamines on a standard drug panel. They are prescription drugs, but you can see there in the latest survey, they estimate that about 79,000 people in England and Wales have misused amphetamines. That would exclude any legal usage, so it doesn't include any usage where obviously somebody's been prescribed an amphetamine and can use it legally. Those numbers there are purely for misuse of amphetamines. So again, that's the sort of six ranked drug type from this survey. Okay, and then to complete the top 10 list, we have opiates, which are naturally produced opioids like morphine, and heroin you would include in there, which is actually a semi-synthetic opioid. They follow in seventh place. As you would expect, there's a significant drop, fortunately, in the estimated usage numbers here compared to the drugs on the previous slide, but still estimated in the latest survey to be over 20,000 people in that age group that would probably be using that type of drug illicitly. Then we've got methadone, which is actually an illegal Class B synthetic cathinone stimulant drug. Again, methadone, you won't really find on a standard drug panel. However, it's a very similar sort of level of usage or misusage to what you would get from opiates and heroin, which you would tend to find on a standard drug panel. So methadone is something else to consider as well. And then completing the top 10, we've got methadone, which is a Class A prescribed drug, and methamphetamine, which is a Class A illegal drug, both of which you would expect to find in a standard drug panel. Okay, so that was the ONS report, and then just to finish off this section, I just spent a bit of time looking at some other data sources as well, just to see if I could give you some other examples, mainly around prescription drugs and polydrug misuse, where you might want to consider testing for as well. I'll start with anticonvulsants. The two most common ones there are pregabalin and gabapentin. I found a data source that told me that the prescriptions for pregabalin and gabapentin had increased by 8% and 29% respectively between 2024 and 2025. And sadly, in the case of pregabalin, there was an increase in involvement in a rising share of drug deaths, and also with polydrug use, where pregabalin is used alongside other types of drugs, such as sedatives like benzodiazepines or even cocaine. Again, sad message to give, but it's reality that we have to be considering sort of increased polydrug usage by people in England and Wales. Gabapentin also used as a polydrug, particularly in opioid misuse, including in some cases with heroin. Then we've got benzodiazepines, which are increasingly being brought on the street. That's a type of sedative. And also zopiclone and zolpidem, other types of sedatives, which are increasingly being seen being sold illegally. We've got tramadol, a Class C opioid, which I'm sure you've heard of. Tramadol, again, in terms of it's a prescription drug, but it's used illegally as well. I read a report, something like a huge increase in prescriptions by about over 30% between 2024 and 25. As a result of that, you probably will find tramadol now available on most standard drug panels. We include it in our top 9, as will other providers. And it's mainly due to that sort of huge increase in being available through prescriptions and then being bought illegally. And the last one I wanted to mention was antidepressants. So things such as fluoxetine or Prozac, you might have is the brand name for one of them. Um, Whilst they're not a controlled prescription drug, they're a really good example of polydrug use. So antidepressants can often be used by somebody in line with some of those other drugs mentioned there on the slide that I've just talked about. And also bear in mind alcohol as well. So alcohol, strictly speaking, is a drug. Um, we see increasing reports about people who have an alcohol issue also using antidepressants to supplement that alcohol usage as well. So you might have a particular case where you want to test for um, excessive consumption of alcohol, but it might be worth doing some drug testing as well. And it could be things like antidepressants that you want to look at. Okay, so hopefully that's been of use to you. Just some of the sort of key examples to think about and how the sort of drug trends are changing over time. I just want to finish off really by talking to you, just to give you an insight into the major drug groups and also an overview of our drug testing panels. So we just released a new guide. You can see it there on the right. It's called the Main Drug Groups in the UK, Legislation, Medical Applications and Symptoms of Misuse. It's a free reference guide. We will have a short survey available at the end of this webinar. You can request copies of the guide when you do the survey, or you can just email our team and ask us as well. But we can electronically send out to you copies of that guide, which you might find useful. And what it does, we broken down all the full range of drugs into 9 major drug groups. So you've got anticonvulsants, antidepressants, antipsychotics, and cannabinoids. And it talks about the different legislation around each of those groups. Where the prescription drugs are involved for a particular drug group, it talks about the sort of typical medical applications where those drugs would be used. And also what you'd probably find interesting for each of the 9 drug groups, we outline the key symptoms you would expect to see with someone by misusing drugs within that drug group. So whilst we're not medical professionals ourselves, we've obviously got good experience at the sort of symptoms you should be looking out for with your clients, which might make you feel that they do need to be tested for a particular drug group. So we've got those 4 there, and then if we move on to the next slide, there's the other 5 as well. So we've got hallucinogens, opioids, sedatives, steroids, and stimulants. So if you're interested in receiving a copy of that, we can provide it electronically, or we can even send you a printed copy. Then just please request it in the survey at the end of the webinar. And just to finish off before I hand over to Ashley, so if you were to request a quote from us at the moment for drug testing and went onto our website, there you can see is our standard drug panel. It's very similar to what other providers would probably offer as well. So it's what we call the top 9 court-ordered drugs, most of which we've mentioned so far in this webinar. You can order all 9 or any sort of selection of them. The Mocha-B panel, which is basically methamphetamine, opiates, cannabis, cocaine, amphetamine, and benzodiazepines, is a very common panel to be selected as well. And then when you look at the non-standard drug panel, we've freshened up the quote form. So we've now put it in the drug group order, and hopefully that will give you a bit more structure. In line with reading the new guide, you can see how there's an extensive number of drugs there in addition to our standard drug panel. So we have made sure we've put them in the relevant drug group. So, and again, we've talked about quite a few of these, like the anticonvulsants, the antidepressants, and so forth. So hopefully that will give you a bit more guidance in terms of what drugs to choose when you come to requesting a quote from us. And of course, our team are always available if you need any further information before deciding what you want to test for. Okay, hopefully you found that of interest. I'm now going to hand over to Ashley, who's going to talk to you about how to choose the right test for your case.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So as Andrew's just been through how to select which drugs are right for you and right for the case, I'm now going to talk about how we test them and what options we have. So when we look at testing for drugs, regardless of which type of drug you select, the most common test that we would do would be looking for drug use by testing a sample of head hair. Now, head hair grows at an average rate of 1 centimetre per month. And this means that in order to conduct this type of test, we would require a minimum of 1 centimetre of head hair from your client. Now, we can look back up to 12 months, providing your client has sufficient head hair, which from the average growth rate would be 12 centimetres to cover 12 months. So that is something that you would want to consider when instructing us as to whether your client has a sufficient sample for exactly what you're looking to prove or disprove when testing for drug use. There are 3 types of drug hair tests available. So we offer an overview analysis, a month-by-month analysis, or a bi-monthly analysis. So I'm just going to briefly go through those 3 options for you. And again, this is in relation to testing a sample of head hair from your client. So the overview analysis is looking at a larger time frame. So it's not necessarily looking at patterns and trends over short 1 monthly periods. It's looking at a larger time frame as a whole. So for an overview analysis, each segment would cover 3 months. And for that, your client would require 3 centimetres of head hair. If your client had 12 centimetres of head hair, we could go back up to 12 months, but you'd get 4 results, 1 covering each 3 monthly segment. So this is ideal in cases where, for example, your client may have abstained from drug use and just be looking to prove that they don't do that. An overview would be sufficient. It would be a cheaper option than looking into a more segmented test. And because you know the result's going to be negative, you don't need that breakdown of the patterns and trends. So it would be ideal in a situation like that. Or if you're just looking at getting sort of like a baseline reading from the client before they enter maybe a program to reduce the use, and you want to understand where the starting point is, that's where an overview would be the more beneficial type of test. The more popular test that we offer is that month-by-month segmented analysis. The reason why this is more popular is because we can look at those patterns and trends. So we can look at a reduction in a client's drug use or an increase, depending on exactly what you're looking to prove. And this would provide an individual result for every month that was tested. So, for example, in this scenario, if your client had 6 centimetres of head hair, we could look back up to 6 months and you would get 6 individual results for that time frame, each one representing the month of testing. And that's where you would be able to see an increase, a decrease, or a stability in that person's use. Again, we can go all the way back up to 12 months, providing your client has 12 centimetres of head hair. Third option for analysis is a bi-monthly segmentation. So this is kind of the in-between. It's not quite an overview. It's not quite a month-by-month segmentation. And we'll show patterns and trends, but looking at 2 monthly results. So again, if your client had 6 months of head hair available, so 6 centimetres, we could go back 6 months. You'd get 3 results, each one covering a 2-month period. And we can do that for any length of hair between 1 and 12 months. If you had 4 centimetres, you would get 2 results, both covering a 2-month period, showing 4 months. It's entirely up to you, and it depends on the case, but it's something to consider when instructing us as to whether your client has a sufficient sample for this type of testing, and if they do, which of those 3 options would be best suited to your case. That's the ideal situation, would be to look at head hair for testing, not always available. So we do offer some other options. The first one would be body hair testing. So for drug use, we can look at testing underarm, chest, leg hair, back hair, forearm, whatever your client has available, we will collect and test it. However, this will be a 12-month overview. So this is not suitable if you are looking at those patterns and trends. You'd want to look at either head hair or an alternative method of testing, because this will be up to 12 months as an overview. But again, if you have a client who's abstained from use or who you just need a baseline reading on, this could be a suitable alternative. For beard hair, we can test this. Now, this is dependent on length. It's a little bit different to body hair. We would simply collect this sample, bring it to the laboratory, and then dependent upon the length, be able to advise you on how long that would cover. Only, again, up to 12 months at a maximum, and only as an overview. So if you're looking at patterns and trends, you may want to look at an alternative method of testing. The next options for you are nail clippings. So if your client has no head hair, no body hair, no beard hair, you could look at testing a nail clipping. So fingernails or toenails, and we take one from each nail. Fingernail clippings would look back up to 6 months as an overview again, so we can't do the monthly segmentation, and toenails would be up to 12 months as an overview. A good alternative if you've got no other sample, but you do need to bear in mind that if you are looking for that month by month breakdown, you're going to either want to do hair strand testing or repeat testing instead. So the options I just spoke about covered quite a large window of testing, so we're looking back months. There are options for shorter windows of testing if that's more suitable to the case and to the client. The first of those narrow window testing periods would be an oral fluid sample, which is simply a mouth swab that we would do, return to the laboratory, and then you would get your report similar to hair strand testing. The difference with oral fluid is the period of detection is approximately 2 days from when the sample is collected. So this is ideal if you want to cover a very specific time period. However, if you are looking to look back over months, then those wider window of detections would be more suitable. Alongside oral fluid testing, we also offer urine samples. These cover approximately 4 days, so a little bit longer than the oral fluid. Again, samples collected, sent to the laboratory, and the report sent out to you. However, because of the nature of a urine sample, because they can be easily adulterated, we want to make sure that we only do this testing at one of our walk-in centres so that we can make sure the environment is controlled, nothing can be added to the sample, and we can maintain that chain of custody for this type of testing. So for urine testing, one of our walk-in centres is the more appropriate collection place. If we're looking at all of the collection options together, as you can see on this graph, we have your 2 narrow window of detections, and then we have the wider window of detections. These different types of samples go really well hand in hand. They complement each other very well because you can look back over a long period of time and also a shorter period of time as well. The main thing to consider when you're looking at wide window testing is that it obviously takes time from ingesting a drug into it showing up in these samples. So, for example, with a head hair sample, from ingestion to it being detectable within a head hair sample takes approximately 14 days. So if you collected a sample today, you would have to allow those 14 days before we allocate a time period. So although the collection took place today, the time frame it covers would be from 2 weeks prior to allow for that ingestion into the growth of the hair. And that's where your narrow window testing would come in. That can bridge that gap from collection to when that period of testing starts. So they complement each other really well in that sense. Like I was just saying, they do complement each other for multiple reasons. For abstinence monitoring, say you had someone who had used previously but was now abstaining, looking at hair strand testing can be beneficial to understand what them patterns were, but it also won't necessarily show that they're abstaining at the moment. And that's where doing something like urine testing alongside of it would really complement that sample and show that that person is abstaining or trying to reduce their use, even though previous history may show a different story. It can ensure a balanced assessment to allow for better informed safeguarding decisions. For example, if someone is abstaining now and you can place or put things into place to support with safeguarding, even though they may have misused in the past. And it can present misinterpretation from the other side of it as well. So because oral fluid and urine samples only cover a short term, it wouldn't necessarily, depending on the person's use, it could allow someone to abstain, for example, for 2 days if they're not dependent in order for them to pass a test, but that might not be the true picture. They may have historically used. So it prevents misinterpretation from both sides of the testing. The benefits of repeat testing show evidence of compliance. So if a court puts some terms in to state that they maybe could have access to the children if they complied with undertaking drug testing and rehabilitation conditions, short-term testing can help monitor that in real time. The other thing is we can look at repeat testing of the wider windows. So, for example, if someone does a hair strand test today, looking back 6 months, they could then retake that test in a month's time, just looking back over the last month, to make sure that they are complying. So repeat testing can benefit for that sense. Again, it can help with improved safeguarding to balance risks and things like that. And it can provide clarity over time. So you're looking at patterns of use going forward, so to speak, rather than waiting 6 months and then testing backwards. You can just test every month to ensure that up-to-date clarity over that time period. As Andrew mentioned earlier, what we've just spoken about and the tables are all in the reference guide that you can request at the end of the survey. So once you've completed that, you can opt in for that. If you do decide later on after this webinar that that would be beneficial to you, and they are brilliant, you can email in and request that as well, either electronically or as a hard copy, whatever your preference would be. Once the sample's been collected, it would be handled by the dedicated case manager. So they would be from point of instruction really all the way through, so you know exactly who your point of contact is. Once you instructed us, you decided what method you were using, what drugs you wanted testing for, and how you wanted your collection to take place. Your dedicated case manager would make contact with the person providing the sample within 2 hours of the case being registered, to get them booked in at the earliest possible time or in compliance with a court order. So if they, for example, like if you're timing this to make sure you cover a certain time frame, they can work with the sample donor to make sure that that's booked in and that the court order is adhered to. It goes without saying that all of our donors are treated with empathy, dignity, and respect. And your case manager will keep you up to date with any changes to the case once the samples are collected, the progress once the sample is received here, and they can also advise you on the best option for sample collection. So if we do make contact with your client and they are not willing or not able to provide a certain type of sample, your case manager can discuss with you what other options are available, and handle that case all the way through to make sure that the outcome is the best possible one that we can provide. So once the instruction's in and we've agreed a date and time with the sample donor, we go through the sample collection process. We do ask that all sample donors have photo identification ready at the time of their appointment where possible, just so we can make sure that we are testing the correct person. And we do also take a photograph of the person tested as well, so that we can show who was there and who provided the sample. We ask that all clients' hair is clean and dry, again, where possible to do. Head hair must be dry before collection, so we make that clear to them. And we ask that they avoid any chemical treatments like bleaches, dyes or perms, anything that could interfere with testing. We ask that they bring along with them any medication that they might be taking that could, again, impact the results of the testing, so anything that they think may show up, so that we can make a note of that and provide that to our experts writing the reports. And if anyone has any religious, cultural or accessibility needs, and we know in advance, we can make adjustments to accommodate all of those. At the time of the appointment, depending on exactly what we're testing, appointment durations are usually 30 to 45 minutes. As mentioned, we ask that they provide photo identification and confirm their details, and we take a photograph of them as well, and the sample site that the sample was taken from, so we know whereabouts on the head or the body that was cut from. Head hair and body hair can be cut using clean scissors. For body hair, we can also shave it using a disposable razor. Depending on how fine the hair is, the collector will make that decision at the time of the appointment. And then nail clippings are cut using clippers that we'll bring to our appointment. It's really important that all of the equipment is brought by the collector and taken away with them as well. And that the sample collector is the only person to handle the collection scissors and the disposable razor, just so we can confirm without doubt that the sample that we collected was the one that reached the laboratory and the one that the results were taken from. Part of this all links in with the chain of custody, so we have to be able to prove and document that the sample that was collected is the one that reaches the laboratory, the one that was tested, and the one that's reported. So we have many steps that are put in place there to ensure that all of that can be accounted for and everything is recorded accurately. We do take a number of samples depending on the sample type. So the minimum number is 2, an A sample and a B sample. But if you are requesting additional drugs, that can vary, and that would all be discussed with the donor prior to the collection taking place. We would complete a consent form that is signed by both the collector and the donor. And if there is an official witness there as well, so if you did accompany them, you can sign as well. And the sample is tracked at every stage from collection all the way through to issue of results to make sure that these samples are legally defensible in court. Unfortunately, on certain occasions, we are asked to test samples taken from children. We are able to do this, but there are some additional things that we have to put in place, obviously, to make sure that the children are safeguarded and due to variations with children's samples. So, children's hair samples are more sensitive to contamination. They're at higher risk of environmental exposure, and the growth rates can vary depending on age, health, and nutrition. And all of these things need to be taken into account. For this reason, the sample size taken from a child can sometimes be much larger than the sample taken from an adult, just to ensure that the weight is sufficient for testing. And all of this would be discussed with yourselves prior to the sample collection going ahead to make sure that everyone involved is comfortable with what would need to be taken. Due to the risk of environmental exposure and the contamination, we do insist that an expert report is mandatory in all children's cases, just so that you have all of the information required when you then present that to whomever that may be or to the court. At least 20 micrograms of hair are collected with a minimum length of 3 centimetres for children. And because children's hair can be much finer, the size of the sample site can appear much larger. And that's something that we really must make you aware of before we attend. We understand this can be a deeply upsetting time for a child, and we wouldn't want to add to that at all. So we always make sure that everyone is fully aware of exactly what is required before attending. In these cases, sometimes it is better to opt for nail clippings to be used as an alternative. Again, we would make you aware of the differences, for example, being an overview and not segmented, and then that might be the more appropriate path to go down, given that it is a child being tested. Someone with parental responsibility must be present during the sample collection appointment and provide consent at that time as well. It also helps with the child being more comfortable with the collector and aids in answering any questions that we might have. We do have a dedicated team of sample collectors based up and down the UK to attend any address in the UK or Ireland. And as I mentioned, for the urine testing using a walk-in centre, we currently have 21 sample collection centres that offer free sample collection appointments. So they're based across the UK. They are appointment only, just so we can manage everyone coming through, but they are free sample collections. So if that's more suitable, rather than us going to someone's home or your offices, we can always offer that method of collection. I'll now hand you back over to Andrew for the question and answer session.
That's great. Thanks very much, Ashley. Okay, right. So we'll move on to the Q&A now. And whilst Ashley was talking, I can see at least one new questions come through, so we'll answer that. I'm going to start with the questions that were asked to us during the registration period for those of you that asked those questions. I'll just take the first couple. So, first question was, what are the key new substances which are being used? Well, to answer that, hopefully in my section, I did answer that. But just to briefly summarize again, I would say ketamine, as you would probably know anyway, is definitely one to be constantly aware of. The hallucinogens, it's not just your LSD and magic mushrooms, but things like mescaline, which seem to be more prominent now, different types of hallucinogens there. Methadone, which I mentioned, which does tend to have quite a high amount of misusage, but you don't necessarily find methadone on a standard drug panel. You often have to go to an extended drug panel. And then things that are used for like polydrug usage, so your anticonvulsants like the gabapentin and the antidepressants as well, like Prozac. Again, we can offer testing for all of those now as part of our extended panel. So whether you use us or another provider, those are the sort of areas or drug types I would say you need to be thinking a bit more about, especially with regard to the sort of polydrug increase in usage by people. You need to take into account those sort of things. The next question was, in situations where it is believed parents are using substances, however unclear what, are there options for wider screening that will show positive, negative results, or can inform the testing that should take place? So yes, we can to a certain extent. So certainly with our standard drug panel, we can offer what's called Drug Screen Plus. Some of you might have used it already. So let's say, for example, you definitely want to test your client for cocaine and cannabis, but you've got a feeling there might be some other substances involved. What Drug Screen Plus does is it will test for the other drugs in the standard drug panel only. So that's like up to another 7, 8 drugs as well. And we will only charge if we find any other additional substances. We will charge for testing for the cocaine and cannabis, whether we find any or not. But the Drug Screen Plus is, in effect, it's free testing, but we do charge if we do find any other drug consumption there. Unfortunately, we can't extend that to the non-standard drug panel. So if you are requesting us to test for a non-standard drug, then we do charge for that, whether we find that drug or not. Hopefully that's answered your question there. And then we've got a couple of questions for yourself, Ashley. The first one, so in relation to the sample collections process, is the sample collection process the same for standard and non-standard drugs?
Yeah, so the process would be exactly the same. The only variation may be the number of samples required for testing, but it depends on what the non-standard drug is. But in relation to photographs, identification, medication, how the sample would be collected, for example, with scissors or with a razor, is exactly the same regardless of whether that's from the standard panel or the non-standard panel.
Great, thanks, Ashley. And then another one for yourself. Can you attend a person's home, so being the sample collector, without a solicitor or social worker present, or do we need to be there?
No, you don't have to be there. You can if you would like to be the witness, or if you feel maybe your client needs a little bit of extra support, we would absolutely welcome you there. However, we do endless amounts of collections without social workers or solicitors present. It's absolutely fine to us. It's the same process. And as I mentioned, the client signs the consent form to state that the information recorded is true and accurate. So no, you don't have to be present, but we'd always welcome you if you wanted to join.
Thanks, Ashley. Just conscious of time, so just got two more questions to come through. The first one for yourself, Ashley. Does pregnancy affect the sample length taken?
No, pregnancy doesn't affect that. It's the only time we would consider pregnancy would be in relation to blood alcohol testing, which you might have heard on one of our other webinars. But no, in relation to drug testing, it would be exactly the same whether the client was pregnant or not.
That's great. Thank you, Ashley. And then we've got another question that's just come through, which I can answer. So how do you quote for the plus testing to ensure we're holding sufficient funds on account? So we would notify you in advance. So when you do the quote request, you need to select the option for the drug screen plus, and then we would almost screen for those drugs that you've asked for. If we do find anything, we will then notify you in advance. So you can then decide at that point if you want to go ahead and have the actual result of it. So yes, you just need to indicate on the quote request form. Okay, right, we're almost out of time. Okay, so let's just finish up. If you do think of any more questions after the webinar's finished, then you can email us. You can see the email address there, testing@alphabiolabs.com. Please do feel free to send through any more questions that you might have, and we will get answers back to you on the same day. How to contact us, visit our website, alphabiolabs.co.uk. You can call the team on 0333 600 1300. We're also on social media. You can see we've got a big following, certainly on LinkedIn now, almost 6,000 followers. If you're not already following us and you're on LinkedIn, then please do. We do post pretty much every day, some fresh content. And we're also on X, or formerly Twitter, as well. If you're on there, then please do look us up. A couple of things just to mention as well. We do have a price promise. If you are price sensitive and you are shopping around, provide us with an equivalent quote from an alternative provider. We promise to beat that quote by a further 10%, and that's 10% total. So not just the test price, it will be off the report fee and the collections fee as well. And also just wanted to give a little plug to our Giving Back initiative. It's a charity initiative where every 2 months we do a draw. The people that go into the draw, the people that have used us most recently, have instructed us for drug, alcohol, or DNA testing. If your name comes out of the hat, you will get a nice phone call, probably from myself, and we will ask you to nominate a dedicated charity of which we will make a £500 donation to. It can be in relation to work, so it could be children's services, children welfare, or it could be something that's also personal to you, your family. As long as they are a registered charity in the UK, we're happy to make that donation on your behalf. So that's just a little plug to our Giving Back initiative that we do. Okay, so all that remains for me to say is firstly, thank you to Ashley for presenting today. Thanks to all of you for listening, taking the time out to do that. Hopefully, you found the webinar of benefit. As I mentioned, there is a very short survey that you will see when you log off. Please do take a minute just to complete it. Your feedback is really valuable to us for the planning of future webinars. And also, as we've both mentioned, you can request copies of the two guides that you can see on the screen there. They're free reference guides. We do believe they will be of benefit to you. You can have an electronic copy or you can request a printed copy. We could send copies in for your colleagues as well. So please just let us know through the survey or just email the team as well, and we can provide you with copies. That's absolutely no problem at all. So finally, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon on an AlphaBiolabs webinar. Thank you and have a good day. Goodbye.